My name is Jake Maurer, and as you can tell, I'm not Australian. I'm from Texas. So if you want to know anything about Texas, just ask me. Very, very happy to be in Australia. It's my first time in Australia. It's a beautiful country. I'm even more happier now that I got my luggage last night. So a little 2-day delay on that action, but that's okay. I was okay. My wife was not happy, but everything's great. But no, it's been beautiful, and just thanks for being here. So my role, just real quick, so you know who's talking up here. My role is I'm a global black belt for Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection and all things Windows security, okay? They call us global black belts. I don't know why. I don't know martial arts or anything like that. So, but that's just what they call us. So my specialty is around Windows security. And so what I did with this demonstration or with this deck is kind of talk through not just the product, but also some of the mindsets that we have around Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection and Windows security all up. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So I think an important thing to mention, and you probably have seen this slide before, but the reason I put it in here is that it's super and critical to understand kind of where we're coming from when it comes to Windows 10, right? We look at something called pre-breach, okay? Pre-breach is the exercise of trying to keep the bad people out of your network, right? And we've made a lot of investments in Windows 10 to keep those bad people out of your network. As you can see here, you've probably seen a lot of these different features here. But there's also a lot of things in Windows 10 that don't make these marketing slides that I think are really critical to talk about. And this being a 400 level session, I think I'd like to touch on those just a little bit here. So for example, you know, a lot of people look at something like Device Guard and they say, well, that's, you know, it's kind of whitelisting trusted publishers and that's kind of tough to manage and things like that. Okay, that's, you know, we're going with Configuration Manager and we're heading those things off. But things like Credential Guard, you know, those are things that you can flip on in Windows 10 and automatically thwart pass the hash and pass the ticket, okay? How many people in here know what pass the hash and pass the ticket is? Okay. Pretty good amount, okay. For those that don't, just real quick summary, essentially it's the ability for me to get on a machine and use freely available tools on the internet or cook my own if I'm sophisticated. And I can basically crack open the LSAS process, which is where we hide a lot of the secrets, right, in Windows in terms of passwords and password hashes, and also tickets for Kerberos and things like that. But essentially, it allows me to do, to exercise a user right called debug the operating system. And debug the operating system allows me to shim into LSAS and pull those tickets out of memory and then write my own tickets and kind of go where I want to go. So if I get on a local machine and I get local admin credentials or local admin privileges through an exploit or something like that, essentially I can sit there, make just enough noise to where a desktop admin logs in, and then once the desktop admin logs in, who also has admin rights over a bunch of other machines logs in, I steal that person's tickets out of memory and I replay them and I act like that person. So those are the types of things that Credential Guard can protect against. And the reason why that's critical is because that type of that type of tactic, if you will, is very prevalent in a lot of the major attacks these days. But you know, there's other things inside of Windows 10 that are critically important too, like memgc. That's something you don't see up on the slide, but essentially that's something that we put in the operating system that thwarts exploits. So gone are kind of the days of us trying to just patch the operating system and stay in this chicken and egg type scenario. What we're doing now is we're using big data to look at all the exploits and the ways that attackers attacked our operating system. And we look at those patterns, right? And when we look at those patterns, we say, okay, I noticed that they're doing this, this, and this with freed memory. So once the memory gets freed out of a process, the attacker will take that free memory and use it to their own bidding. So memgc or memory garbage collection goes and cleans those things up. Another one is like app container for fonts. So font confusion, if you will, is another attack vector that attackers will use to try to get system privileges. So they'll basically send a font that's funky in nature to where they can escalate their privilege and move on. But because we're putting that font in an app container versus running in the kernel, those types of things are being mitigated by that kind of investment. So things that don't make the slide, but as you can see, we're really taking pre-breach very seriously, and not just in features that you see on a slide, but also core to the operating system as well. Why are we doing that? This is why, right? So if you saw the kickoff slide, the session, you probably saw this as well. 46% of compromised systems had no malware on them, which means your antivirus did not find them, okay? 46% of the time. So if you think about it, that means 54% of the time you had an adversary that was able to cook their own malware or come up with their own malware or buy their own malware on the dark web and propagate it their own way. 23% of recipients opened phishing messages, 11% clicked on the attachment. With attackers, it's all about trying to do it cheap and easy, right? Because if you make it too expensive, then it's not really worth it, right? So what they do is, instead of trying to find a zero-day exploit or something like that, let's use human emotion as a point of getting in, right? Human emotion like urgency. Like if I send you a spoofed email from your manager saying, hey, I don't know if you saw this, but your expenses were due last week. Click on this Word document, and here's the form, and go fill it out. Well, the Word document has a flash 0 day in it, and boom, away you go. So those are the types of things. And then finally, once they get in, it's taking over 200 days to find them. That number to me is staggering, right? Staggering. I mean, the way I think about it is, think about somebody being in your house for 200 days, playing your Xbox, eating your Cheetos. You have Cheetos here? I don't know. I love Cheetos. But they're eating your Cheetos, they're hanging out on your couch making a mess, and you don't even know they're here. You just keep blaming the kids, right? So, I mean, that's a pretty scary thing to think about, that somebody could be in your network for 200 days and you don't even know, okay? How do they get in? We talked about spear phishing and social engineering, a watering hole. So if I do some DNS or some reconnaissance on your company, and I know some of the websites that people typically go to that are interest groups and things like that, maybe I exploit one of those websites, I set up exploit code on there, and then whenever somebody goes to that website, they get owned. So that's kind of a typical watering hole attack. Direct hacking, of course, that's trying to find some kind of exploit or some kind of open port or something like that. And then insider knowledge, insider threats, that's critical too. So our posture really is on three major pillars, okay? It's on protect, it's on detect, and respond. So far, the things that I've really been talking about is around protect. How do we keep these folks out of our network? But detect and respond is equally as important as well, and that's why we've kind of reached our critical mass in another section of this defense posture, which is post-breach. Post-breach was born on a principle. And that principle is that no matter how many fences you build or how many IPSs you deploy, how many IDSs you employ, how many firewalls you deploy, how many agents you load on your machines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a determined adversary will get in. And if you don't believe that, that's cool. But why not just act like that anyway? Why not act like, you know what, I might be pretty good at my job, but I bet you there's somebody out there that's better, so I have to assume that person is going to get in, and I need to be able to find them. And that's exactly how we should think about security in layers, right? If they beat this, then what? Okay, if they beat that, then what? And then finally, after they beat everything, how are we going to find them? Not only how are we going to find them, how are we going to know how they got in, how do I know what they're going to do, and how do I know how to take them out? Those are the three questions that we really need to get answered. And we do that with Defender Advanced Threat Protection, which I'll show you today. One thing that's really important, though, to take into consideration is Windows 10 has security built in. If you don't, if you're thinking about Windows 10 and upgrading to Windows 10 and you're looking at the features like 3D drawing and stuff like that and you're wondering, is it really worth it? If you're serious about security, security should be the #1 reason you go to Windows 10. There's a blog entry, and if you want to ping me, I can get it to you. But there's a blog entry that actually shows where Windows 10 Anniversary Edition thwarted 2 0 days that every other operating system in our stack was vulnerable to. And the reason it did that was not because the vulnerabilities didn't exist, they did. But the mitigations for exploit in Windows 10 are how we beat it. So just to show you, those are things that you get automatically just by deploying Windows 10. But from a post-breach perspective, so that's pre-breach, from post-breach perspective, our Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, what we call the Sense agent, it's not an agent at all. It's actually built into the Windows 10 operating system. So when you upgrade your machines or deploy new machines to the Anniversary 1607 edition of Windows 10, you automatically get the agent bits for Defender. So no more separate deployment. No more scripts to try to push out, code and figure out why it broke, is WMI messed up? That kind of stuff kind of goes away. The other thing is too is that it's serviced that way too. It's serviced as part of the operating system. So that means that whenever we need to update the agent, we're updating it as part of our code releases for Windows. So when you think about things like, oh, is my agent going to break if I patch the kernel in this way, or if I patch user mode in this way, is that going to break my agent? Those things kind of go away because we're testing that for you. So advanced threat protection, I think, for Defender is really on 4 key pillars here. So I'd mentioned it's built into Windows 10. So as you deploy Windows 10 Anniversary Edition, the way you light up Defender ATP, other than buying the license, of course, but we're not here to talk about licensing, is essentially you roll out a wake-up script, if you will, and you can do that through config-man and things like that, which we'll talk about in a session tomorrow. But the great thing is that as you're deploying Windows 10, you're really deploying Defender ATP as well. So that whole second step to get the agent out there, compatibility, things like that, kind of go away. The other piece too is that we've really worked hard to cut down on any false positives, because we all know, I don't know if you were a SCOM person in a former life like I was, but I made the critical mistake, well, it was really Mom, I think, when I did this. Basically, I would install a management pack and turn everything on, and I got so many alerts that it was just like, oh my gosh, what do I do with all this stuff, right? Hey, I need some overtime. But yeah, what we did was we really only surfaced the alerts that you need to look at. And I'll show you kind of the life cycle of how you work those alerts too. There's a certain way to work those. You can integrate into your ticketing system, those types of things. But not just that, but we do more than just alert, because a lot of products alert, right? They send you a lot of alerts. We take it a step further and say, okay, this is how we came to that alert, and these are all the things you need to know on why that alert happened. And then it even gives you a way to give us feedback that it's a false negative or a false positive. So lots of kind of two-way communication that's going on between you and us. And then finally, it's a single pane of glass. So I can essentially find the detector, get alerted on the detector, investigate what happened, and then respond as well. And we'll talk about that as well. Backed up to this really is what we call the Microsoft Security Graph, or Intelligent Security Graph. And I used to think that this was like a big marketing term, and it's like on all the marketing slides and things like that, until I really saw with my own eyes like what it was. It's kind of like the Matrix, right? You have to look at it in code form, or else it doesn't make any sense. It's sort of like that. Essentially, I used to be an identity salesperson, and people would say, hey, what's different about your telemetry versus other people's telemetry? It's like, well, the reason why our telemetry is a little different is because we do 1.4 billion authentications a day across our platform, and we correlate all those things together. Guess what? Part of that 1.4 billion authentications are bad people trying to get in the millions per day, millions of attempts per day that we're thwarting with that identity service. We're updating Windows. People are using Windows. People are using smart screens. They're going to websites. Bing is crawling pages and scanning them for vulnerabilities. So all these things are feeding into this massive, massive security graph. And then not to mention all the emails we see through like Outlook or Hotmail.com if you're old school like me, that kind of thing. Okay, so I kind of talked about why Defender Advanced Threat Protection exists, but let's take a look at the architecture, okay? Because it might seem kind of like the man behind the curtain kind of thing, but let's just kind of break down what it looks like here. So essentially, if you're looking at it in the upper left, that's really where the endpoint sensor is. So picture that as Windows 10 Anniversary all built in, okay? And then down one, with the SecOps console, that's the web interface that I'm going to show you. We're going to spend some time in today and kind of dig around and look at things. That actually runs in Azure. The middle part, the security analytics tier, is really where we're doing the hunting on your data. So that lives in Azure. It's in scalable units inside of Azure. And essentially what it does is it takes data from those endpoints and looks for certain things that we'll talk about here in a minute. It also does detonation as well, so you can send a file up to it and let it detonate and see all the behaviors and explore it and that kind of thing to see what it is. And then into that security analytics tier, we also have threat intel from partnerships, which I'll talk about in a minute, but we are a subscriber to Firesight's iSight threat intelligence. So we realize that this is a better together type battle that we're fighting against these very, very smart and well-funded sometimes adversaries. So why not take iSight's telemetry in there and or threat intelligence in there and make it a better story. And then also we have our threat hunters too. So you'll hear from him here in a minute in digital form. Dave Weston heads up our threat intelligence research department. So we have threat researchers that are basically deconstructing new bits that we find in the field. How do we find that stuff? Essentially, we have consulting services that go out to different customer sites. They gather samples, send it up with the customer's permission. We deconstruct it to see if it's something new or something we already own, things like that. So we have our own threat hunters as well. Okay, so let's take care of a couple terms before we get into the GUI here. There's really two different types of things that we're looking for. IOCs, or indicators of compromise, and indications of attack. Okay, so indicators of compromise are things that we know about. Okay, so that's a file signature, or that's an actor that we typically are tracing across the world because they're using certain code or certain tactics. So we've identified, we've seen them before. And we name our adversaries after elements. Okay, so for example, strontium. How many people in here have heard of Fancy Bear? Anybody? Okay, Fancy Bear. Funny name, I don't know what his name is, but so Fancy Bear, that's a adversary that we've been tracking, I think, since 2006. So they've been around for almost a decade. But we've referred to them as strontium. Others refer to them as like APT and a number, et cetera. But what we know about strontium is that they have there's certain actions that they take that make them who they are, right? So if we see certain things like these IP addresses, if we see these type of executables or credential type theft tactics and things like that, we know it's them. And then we know some domains that they've also spoof as well to lure people in. So these are things that we know about. This is what we consider to be the easy stuff. Okay, these are things that we've already fingerprinted and known about for years sometimes. What we're really interested in are these, which are the indications of attack. And what these are really around behaviors of what these are. So maybe it's a new memory-only attack. Maybe it's a kernel attack of something we've never seen before. Maybe it's a piece of code we've never seen before, things like that. But we're basically looking at certain telltale tactics like command and control and things like that to try to build a profile and put them on our table of elements, right? Try to figure out who they are. So here's some different examples of some indicators of attack. So for example, how are they exploiting? What kind of exploitation are they using? Are they doing ROP chaining? I mean, what are some of the things they're doing? How do they gain persistence? Are they only doing things through ASAP or what's the deal with that? How are they stealing credentials? Are they rolling their own Mimikatz, or perhaps they have something else? And then also lateral movement. How do they reconnaissance? Once they get in, how do they look around? How do they map the network? What tools do they use? Command and control, where are they going back to? How are they communicating? How often are they communicating? What protocols are they using? And on and on and on. And so by those, we actually have over 100 different indicators of attack inside of Windows Defender ATP. So essentially what I'm trying to tell you is that even if there's a new actor in play, like, well, I won't use my own name, that's somewhat self-incriminating. Bob Smith, and if there's a Bob Smith in here, sorry, Bob Smith's new attack world, right? Or the Pony Express. I don't know, call it whatever you want. But if they come out and they use some of these tactics, we can find them even if we don't know about them because we know the kind of behaviors and the kind of plays these folks run. Okay. So if you were here yesterday, this is going to be a bit of a review, but if you weren't, then that's okay. But essentially what I'd like to do next is go through an attack, okay? And what we'll do is we'll look at the attack and what it looks like from a user and an attacker perspective. So on your left, that's the victim's machine and what they see. And then on the right, you've got the attacker's machine and what they're doing, okay? So let's kind of roll the tape here. I wish I had some like suspenseful music, but I don't. Okay, so here, Liz Bean actually has an email from her boss. It has a Word attachment in it. And all she does is just click that enable content up there. And once and basically that Word document has an exploit code inside that macro that she just ran, and it gives that attacker on the other end command and control over her machine. So once they have command and control, then they start uploading their little friendly toolkit that they're going to use to kind of do their bidding on that machine and then throughout the network as well. So essentially what you're looking at is that the attacker has established a tunnel back to Liz Bean's machine. There's the IP address of her machine and everything else. There's the host name of her machine. So they essentially, if you're familiar with like PowerShell remoting, this isn't PowerShell remoting, but this is the same kind of concept. They're maintaining persistence by injecting inside the run key, and then they're executing a port scan to do more reconnaissance internally. Okay, so that's kind of the attack. Okay, so that attacker has successfully set up a home base on Liz Bean's machine. Okay, let's take a look at the portal and let's deconstruct this threat a little bit. Enough talking. So this is Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protections portal. So this runs in Azure. Okay, this is a web portal. We also have API hooks in this to where you can ingest this into your SIEM from an alert perspective, but you're probably only going to want to do that from an alert perspective because the amount of data, and you'll see in a minute, the amount of data and the way we're going to deconstruct the attack and look at the relationships between the objects and things like that would just be too huge and too complex to try to reconstruct in your SIEM, okay? But we certainly understand the value of SIEMs, and people have built a lot of process around their SIEMs, so we do support SIEMs as well. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a dashboard, and the first thing I look at that catches my eye straight away is this high one, okay? So we do give it high, medium, low based on our scoring system. So let's take a look at this high one here. Okay, NeuroBlaze, okay? And one thing I want to comment here is that this isn't just catching big stuff. Somebody after the session yesterday came up and said, what about the little stuff, you know? Like, can I know if somebody's watching illegal, like, pirated movies on their machine using a Chrome extension? Yes, you can. Can I know if somebody's, you know, tearing it up on, you know, XYZ new app on their Windows 10 box? Yes, you can. It's searchable too. So this isn't just for the big players. This is also for finding the normal hygiene things that are that you want to kind of head off to, and I'll show you that in a minute too. All right, so let's drill into NeuroBlaze here. Okay, NeuroBlaze. Sounds like a cool name. I wish I came up with it. So what is NeuroBlaze? So if I'm a SOC analyst, or I'm just an IT admin with security as one of the other hats I wear, that's what we built this tool for. This tool can either be used for SOC, secure operations centers that span, you know, 10s, 20s, peoples, you know, that kind of thing, or it could just be an IT admin whose security is the other hat they wear. So let me show you some things that it can do here. So NeuroBlaze, if I want to know a little bit more about NeuroBlaze, what I can do is click on NeuroBlaze, and here's our threat intelligence on this attacker NeuroBlaze. So pretend this was Strontium from our previous example. This would tell me everything there is to know about Strontium. And it tells us some pretty interesting information too. They've been active since 2007. This is pretty interesting. Whoa, sorry, I didn't mean to give you whiplash there. They target government agencies, diplomatic institutions, and military organizations. Okay, that's kind of interesting, and maybe I'm a diplomatic institution, so I know now they're probably after me. This is what they do. These are their TTPs, or tools, tactics, and processes. This is where they tend to attack in the world. And then here's the different defenses, and you can download this to a PDF and things like that. So now I know more information about who this person is inside my network, right? Give me a little background information on that. And I didn't have to basically do anything. You know, Defender ATP did that for me. Next, and this is probably one of the most favorite things that people like seeing, and this is our security graph, if you will, or our investigative graph, incident graph. So essentially what it shows is this attack kind of started on Liz Bean's machine and then spanned out to these different files in play. And then each one of these little circles here is actually a flyout to different machines. So we're tracing the MD5 hash or the SHA-256 hash of those files across your entire network. Because remember, this is a Windows 10 built-in agent. So even if this person is off my network, it's reporting up to the cloud and I can see this data. And this is pretty critical because what if the person gets owned inside your org and then flies to, you know, another part of the country or something like that? When they come back online, you want to get that data so you can contact them. And that's actually from a real case there. And I can go in here and kind of click in each one of these and see what it's at. But it looks like to me, you know, I probably need to do some investigative things around Liz Bean's machine. Now, in the past, what I've done is I've like, okay, you know, got a AV alert on Liz Bean's machine, you know, I'm going to have to put on my ski mask and bust through a window and grab her machine and run out, right? And format it, ask her a bunch of questions about what you clicked on, what did you do, it's all your fault, you know, were you neglected as a child? Whatever, right? You'd have to kind of go through a questioning process for Liz Bean. Now we can kind of save her from the trauma of the SOC analyst coming in through the window. So now let's click on Liz Bean's machine and kind of look at some different things. So we show some interesting things, like here's her operating system. Here's the different logged in users. Here's the IP addresses that we've seen. When's the first time we saw this machine? When's the last time we saw this machine? We have reporting around that too, so you can see what's idle and what's not. I can also pivot on Liz Bean's identity and see kind of where she's logging in on the network and things, because remember, we're looking at the endpoints. But then this shows, my zoom is kind of throwing off the things here. But then this shows the different things that are, the different alerts that are in play for this machine. So if I click on NeuroBlaze, in this machine timeline, I can see all the different things in play for NeuroBlaze. It'll show me kind of contextually when we identify NeuroBlaze and all the things that lead up to it. And here you'll see this machine timeline here. So we have the ability to store up to 120 days of data for each machine. Now, a lot of people ask me, man, when are you going to come out with an on-prem version of this? When are you going to come up with an appliance? We're storing 120 days of black box flight recorder data for every machine you have this deployed on. In MSIT, we have it on over 500,000 machines. So if you try to do that on-prem, you're going to need a data center just for this data, right? So that's why it's a cloud. And even if you could store the data, how fast would it respond? Would it be able to give you that kind of snappiness that I'm showing here? The other thing about this timeline is I can basically drag this over and say, okay, well, what was going on Liz Bean's machine on September 10th? Remember, folks, it's February 15th. This always throws me off, the dates first. It's like, I don't know what's happening. Like these escalators on the left going up, I'm like, what's happening? But yeah, so this is the timeline. So I can go back on her machine and look at what her machine was doing on 9/10. Now that's important. That's important. Because what this means is if I don't know about an attack today, if I know about the attack tomorrow, we sweep the previous days of that machine to see if that attack is in play. Think about the amount of data analytics you have to do for that. It's pretty mind-boggling. So just to make sure that I'm clear, we can detect things even if they happened in the past and we didn't know about them today. Okay, I'm a DeLorean owner, which is kind of cool. It's kind of geeky, right? Brings me up on the geek scale. But that's like, we call it time travel. And I can't time travel my DeLorean, but that's pretty cool in terms of from a what was this machine doing and things like that. So now you have some useless trivia on me as far as DeLoreans go. All right, let's go back to this. Whoa, I didn't hear that one. Oh, man. Oh, come on, somebody's got to shout that out. What was that? Very good. Do I derive it every day or just time to time? I like that, yeah. That's for the recording. I did that for the recording. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, most of the time it's broke down, but that's another story. But anyway, all right, so let's look at NeuroBlaze and see exactly what's going on. So now I'm in the context of NeuroBlaze. And what I can do here is expand out what makes up NeuroBlaze. Remember, we talked about indicators of compromise, right? And what the symptoms are of that attacker. These are the symptoms that we have looked into, and these are the tactics and procedures that they've taken for us to determine that this is NeuroBlaze. So that's how we know. Right, so now let me go down here a little bit and let's get a little bit more technical. So how many people have kind of a background in like Windows performance tracing and things like that? Yeah, okay, cool. You're after my heart. I was a Premiere field engineer for Premiere for about 4 years, and I did performance tracing, right? Woo, yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, so you might be wondering, like, how are you getting this data? Are you running like Procmon and steroids, or what's going on? No, in fact, what we're doing is we're using a secure channel of event tracing for Windows, or ETW. So if you've ever used something like XPerf or anything like that, that's the same channel we're tapping into. It's just a secure channel now for this data. So it's very, very fast, and it's very, very efficient. Okay, cool. Okay, so now let's go down to the first alert when this kind of happened. And I'm looking at this, and I'm kind of looking through here, and I say, okay, Windward ran a file from the user's folder. That's kind of weird. So if I expand that, oh yeah, see the demo gremlins. It's probably the joke about the DeLoreans. It's like John DeLorean's haunting me in my sleep. All right, let me go back to this. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me expand this and take a look. Okay, cool. So now I can see, okay, it looks like Explorer, so this is the process chain, right? So Explorer executes Outlook, executes WinWord, and then drops install.exe. Now what I can do about install.exe is that this is the MD5 hash for it, right? So if I click on that, I can see some different things about install.exe. In fact, I can click on this and it'll take me to kind of a different view, and there's some data that's pretty cool. So now we're in the context of this file called install.exe. Here's the SHA-1 hash, here's the MD5 hash, et cetera, et cetera. But what's important about this slide is this one right here. So now we can tell you out of that 1 billion endpoint sensory nodes around the world, we can tell you how many times we've actually seen this MD5 hash. We've only seen it twice in the world, so what does this tell you? It probably means that this was crafted just especially for you on Valentine's Day, right? So yeah, so we've only seen it 2 other times in the world, which means this was made just for you, meaning this is probably a targeted attack. Okay, so now I'm a little more freaked out. Let's keep going. So let me go back to her computer. Go back in the context. Okay. All right, cool. So now you'll notice this little link here, and it says Outlook.exe saved 5 attachments to disk. Take a look at this here. Not only are we telling you the process of the message that it opened, but we're also reaching into Office 365 and we're getting the information about the message as well. Okay? So now think about what we talked about at the beginning of how these attackers get in, right? One of them is spear phishing through email. That's the easy, cheap way to get in. Okay? So essentially what I can do is I can click on this link and it'll take me over to Office Advanced Threat Protection. And what this does is it tells me, okay, out of all the people, like the next thing I'm thinking is it came in through email, who else got it, right? So now I can kind of go into the email, into Office Advanced Threat Protection and say, okay, it looks like it was delivered to these folks, but what happened was Defender ATP realized it as NeuroBlaze, as an attack indicator of compromise from NeuroBlaze, talked back to Office ATP and said, strip that stuff out of the Yolanda's and Roger's email because it's no good, okay? So this was something that got through the filters, so it's definitely 0 day. It's never been seen before, but we were able to reach back into Office and strip it out. So going back to this, let's take a look a little bit closer. So now we know that there was an executable that dropped on the machine. The executable then ran command.exe. Okay, and command.exe ran this batch file here. Okay. And this is chronological, okay, so going from oldest to newest up top. So keep working our way up the process chain here. Okay, interesting. That batch file called PowerShell, okay? I'm a pretty crappy PowerShell person. How many people in here love PowerShell? Give a shout out. Woo! It's after lunch, guys. I gotta get this going. I'm a pretty crappy PowerShell scripter guy, mainly a forger of other people's scripts. But I know that running PowerShell from command line is pretty sketchy. But take a look at this command line. This is pretty weird. PowerShell.exe. Does anybody know what this switch does? No profile. Very good. No profile. I wish I had like a car or something to give you glory. Running it hidden, non-interactive, turning off or bypassing the or execution mode of bypass, right? Start sleep. Now look at this though. They run a .NET command into a base64 encoded string. Okay, I don't speak base64 off the top of my head, but that tells me that's probably bad. And sure enough, that was another indicator of attack. We said, hey, somebody ran this PowerShell command. It doesn't look quite right. Next, we find the reverse shell out of PowerShell. We catch them getting into the registry. In fact, here's how they're getting into the registry. We showed that kind of in the video. But yeah, here's the command. Here's the key that they're injecting into to maintain persistence. And then the port scanner is kind of the last thing, and they're just kind of doing the reconnaissance, and that makes up NeuroBlaze. Okay? So basically what we've done is we've gone from one alert that was bad, red, red's bad, don't press the red button. But then now we know who it is, we know what they did, and then going back to the incident graph, we also know where they went, right? So let me go back to this NeuroBlaze. So now we know where they went. So now we can say, okay, now I know that they did these files. Where else are these files? They're on these files. But I can also say, okay, sysdebugger.exe, take the MD5 hash, and search for it across my network. And essentially what this will give me is every machine that this file is actually on. Okay, so I can kind of pivot on it two ways. I can either use a security graph or I can do a search. Okay. And essentially I did this with no agents. This is in the box, Windows 10 for Anniversary Edition, talking up to our cloud. So either if it's on your network or out the internet, that data is coming up through this. I'm saving some stuff. I'm saving the big, fireworks at the end kind of stuff. But any questions thus far? I want to kind of pause and just kind of, is this pretty cool? Am I showing you the kind of stuff you want to see? Okay, cool. All right. Feel free to throw money. That's cool. Yes, sir.
I think I might know the answer. I'm just going to throw it out.
I like seeding questions. That's cool. Yeah.
So we've seen some information about
Yep.
Windows Analytics where there's a delay in processing time. And I don't think there's obviously going to be a delay in processing here with up telemetry up, into the cloud from your site.
Yep.
But is that service processed within Australia if you were to sign up, or is that processed back in the States?
I was wondering when I was going to get this question. Good question. So the question, just to repeat, is where is this, the cloud analytics tier, right? The part that runs in Azure. We have these great Australian data centers, right, for Azure. Woo! Is this running in Australia? The answer is no, but that's why I'm here, okay? I'm here because we work on customer demand. So today, there's two places that it runs mainly. There's the United States and there's Europe, okay? We did that so that we could keep customer data in central locations. Now, the cool thing is that, I work very, very closely with the product team, right, that wrote this, and they want to light this up in other data centers. This is a costly service to run in the background. You can imagine the amount of storage that this has to do, or it has to take up, the amount of compute and things like that is pretty intense. I just realized I totally failed to show the detonation. That's terrible. I'll show that here in a minute. But all the compute and all the detonation services and things like that take a lot of processing, so it's kind of expensive to ramp it up in a data center. But my hope is that I'm going to be in Australia this week and then seeing customers next week, is that I can go back to the product group and say, hey, I just spent 2 weeks in the awesome Australia with some awesome people. This is how many seats that are interested in this. That drives their behavior, okay? So do I think it can come to Australia? Absolutely. We gotta prove the business is there, just being transparent.
The Windows TSPs that are across Australia, there's 5 of us, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and Canberra. So feed that message back if you're interested to chase this service.
Yep. Yeah, one thing, just real quick before we take another question, I totally didn't show this and I'm kind of ashamed of myself. I'm kind of cowering behind the desk here. I did not show you detonation. So we do have detonation too. It's you kick it off. In other words, we're not interested in like gathering all these files and all these things. You actually kick off this detonation. So if I look at this install.exe and I don't know what it is, there's only 2 of them in the world, so I am a little bit worried about it. Essentially, I can submit this up to our cloud service for detonation. And what this does is it goes up to some VMs that we have a major amount of instrumentation turned on in it, and it basically runs the file and then just traces it down to the nth level. And you'll see the nth level here. So this is the deep analysis summary, and this comes with the service, so no extra cost or anything like that. Sound like a used car salesman there. But this is all the IP addresses that it talks to. These are all the PE files that it creates and drops. This is what it injects into command.exe's memory. This is all the files that it drops. So you can see the amount of data. So I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you used to have to run on like an isolated box and then run your traces and then make the sense out of the data. Here, you click one button from the service, we go out and we grab the file, we pull it up to the cloud, we blow it up, and then we give you this tracing data. So pretty slick. Yeah, pretty slick. Any other questions before we move? Yes, sir. Or, I'm not sure who was first. Lesser walk here, but yeah. Most efficient route? I don't know. So.
You stated that actually this file was seen only twice, right? So it's a zero-day attack. Like, how do you determine the signature of this? Like, how does it determine the signature if it's not seen anywhere else? Like, how does it know how it behaves? How does it give it a name or something?
Right.
Like that?
Yeah, so the file has properties in it, right? I think the trick with this is, though, is that somebody wrote this code. It still has an MD5 hash and everything else. It may not be signed or anything like that, but there's the MD5 hash on it. There's the way it behaves, things like that. All that's kind of meshed together, and we look across all the endpoints to see if that file's ever been seen before. So it's not signature-based. It's basically looking at properties of the file to determine where we've seen it before. So that's essentially how we're trying to figure out if it's been anywhere else or not. Yep. Yeah, remember, this is not a signature-based product, right? And that's important to reemphasize. This works alongside with AV. We want AV, it's kind of like a filter, right? We want AV filter to get the big chunky stuff, right? The big chunky parts, which is the just general script kiddie malware crap that you want it to find, right? This is going to find the stuff that this misses. So stuff that there's not a signature for or anything, okay?
You mentioned that you keep a log for 120 days per device.
Yep.
And you also mentioned that typically you have a thread in your house for 200 plus days.
Yep. Wouldn't
it be a good idea to be able to trace back from the beginning?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Yeah, no, the obvious question, absolutely. It's a good point. The key here, though, is that we don't want to wait for 200 days, right? So let's say a machine is owned, okay, and the person is, the adversary is rooting around on the machine, doing kind of their bidding, that kind of thing. And then you turn this on, we find them like that. So then it's 30 days, right, or whatever. If they come in and this is already on, we find them in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, et cetera. So the point is that we should not need 200 days anymore. We should need maybe a half an hour to an hour, something like that for analysis. I'll take one more and then we got to trudge ahead. Yes?
What are the bandwidth requirements needed to be able to run this? Like if you've got on-prem or cloud, like between the two?
Yep, good question. So the I'm sorry? And latency. Latency, yeah. Yeah, no, these are good questions. So the great thing is that this data is actually really, really small. The amount of data that we're sending up is highly refined and highly compressed. And because it's in the box with Windows, we're actually kept to very strict performance, okay? Performance guidelines of Windows. In other words, they have gates, performance gates that we have to meet. And so if we use too much battery or too much CPU or too much, disk or whatever, nope, you're not shipping that update, no way. So that's kind of how it works. So from a bandwidth perspective, we adjust dynamically to the bandwidth that they're in right now, and we won't send any more than 5 megabytes a day, okay? But 5 megabytes sounds pretty small, but just FYI, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, in one of the largest implementations of Defender ATP that we have, we're using about 1.5 megs a day, and that's on very busy machines, just to give you a benchmark. Why only 120 days? That's just a sweet spot. I don't know where. Now, you can tune that, right? You can do 30 days, 120 days. Is it 6 months? 6 months, 180. It's 180? Oh, okay, yeah. It's the humidity. I can't think. Yeah, 180 days. Thank you very much. Yeah, 180 days. So yeah, I mean, why not keep it indefinitely, maybe, is the thought? I don't know. I think that the big thing is that we want to be able to find things in the past, but I don't think we would have the storage resources if this thing really, if it takes off the way we think it's going to take off, which so far so good, being able to store that for every customer, that would be pretty tough. Okay, let's keep going here. Okay, so we kind of went through that, the attack stage. I kind of broke that out for you. I talked about eyesight. The other thing is that a lot of customers want to upload their own threat intel. So if you're a oil and gas company or something like that, and you've got a lot of really advanced attackers actually coming in and attacking you and things like that, and you have your own MD5 hashes you want to upload or different signatures, et cetera, we actually have an API to where you can upload those into your own private tenant as well. Okay, so we've talked about indicators of attack, indicators of compromise. I showed you some PowerShell stuff and how they're doing base64, but this is a cat and mouse game, okay? Every time, I don't know whether we're the cat or the mouse, I'm not sure, I never know about that phrase, but it's definitely leapfrogging. So whenever we come out with something, the attackers figure something out and say, oh, if we do this, then we can avoid it, and so on and so forth, okay? And anybody that's been in security for a little while knows this quite well. So what are we doing now? So what we're looking at for today, I kind of showed you some different things like file-based user mode malware, ASAPs, pass ticket, things like that. But where we're going is we're really starting to look at the more advanced attacks, so memory only. They never hit the disk, okay? So even if you've got a signature or not, typically an antivirus vendor has like what's called a filter level driver, right? So they shim in to the stack to where anything that reads or writes from the disk, that's how they intercept and trigger. Well, if you're memory only, they're not going to see that, right? So that's a very popular technique these days. Kernel level too. So we're seeing more and more kernel exploitations. In fact, that article I talked about last November had actually a zero-day kernel in it. But essentially, these are kind of the things that we need to be detecting next. So I don't know, we did release some blogs on this, but perhaps you haven't heard, but in the next version of Windows, or next build of Windows, if you will, in the creators update, we're actually implementing new sensors inside of our Sense agent that runs on the machine to detect these new types of attacks. And I thought I might let Mr. Dave Weston, DWizzle, who is head of our actual threat intel research. You probably know him from some Black Hat stuff that he's done and things like that. He talks a little bit about those sensors, so let me roll this real quick.
One of the things we've seen in the last year to 18 months is this almost ubiquitous move to memory as a means to evade conventional detection systems. And so one of our top priorities coming into this new version of ATP was to look at the memory problem from a very unique perspective, pull in our partners from other operating system teams who own the memory manager, and sit down together to solve this issue by building a revolutionary sensor that we think could cover the wide spectrum of memory-based threats. The second thing that we've done is we've noticed the increased trend and the ability for attackers to develop kernel exploits to sort of evade conventional anti-malware systems which don't have the required visibility into the kernel. In the creators update, we've been able to introduce more signals from the Windows kernel that's sent to our cloud that allows us to detect new kernel attacks, and we've also introduced the ability to have visibility into cross-process code injection. That's a very popular technique used by nation states and cyber attackers alike.
So that was Mr. Dave Weston. So Dave Weston heads up our threat researchers. So those are the folks that are looking for new types of malware, looking for new types of techniques that people are doing, et cetera. And I think he said something in that video that real quick that I think is pretty critical. Because we own the memory manager and because we own the kernel, we own that code, essentially we have the ability to invent new ways of hooking into those from a very efficient perspective and also insightful perspective as well, right? When it comes to a third party, absolutely we have ways that they can hook into the kernel and things like that. But you always run the risk of something if we patch something with the kernel that people are starting to exploit. Because we're built into Windows, we test for those types of things. Whereas a third party, if they're reverse engineering our kernel or our memory manager, you can actually blue screen, okay, on an update to one of those pieces of code. But that's, I think, is pretty unique in the fact that, if we're looking for a certain type of attack, we just go talk to the person that wrote the virtual memory manager. And we say, hey, they figured out a way to do this. Oh yeah, it's in this part of the code that I wrote, 20 years ago. Okay, cool. Show me how that works. Okay, yeah, we can detect it like this. Boom, done, solved. And we've done that on many, many occasions, even with the kernel. Okay, cool. The other question we get a lot, other than why you just keep 180 days, is what about response, right? So I've talked to you all about how we're catching these things and how we're detecting these things and trying to cut down that 200-day window. But what about response? Well, that's another thing that we're actually we're releasing with the creators update. So let me show you this file stop and quarantine. So I showed you the file before where you can click on the file. And essentially what you can do here, this is really small, I apologize for that. I think it zooms in. But essentially if you identify, like in the case that we had, if you identify that a file is bad, essentially you can click basically block and quarantine, and essentially it will terminate that process right out of memory, kill the process essentially, and quarantine it on that file. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works in the background. You can also blacklist the file as well. So if you are using Windows Defender AV as your primary AV, we can actually send a signal up to the cloud and say, hey, this SHA or this MD5 hash is bad, and it'll block it from there on out, even if the signature didn't exist. And then finally, if the machine is super compromised and you want to try to kind of stop the bleeding, so to speak, you can actually quarantine the machine off the network only so that it can communicate up to Defender. So these are all signals that we send from the cloud back down to the client. And then finally, I think this is really cool. You know, whenever there is a compromise, sometimes getting to that machine is a hard thing to do, right? If the machine's on the other side of the world and I need to get some data off of it, that can be challenging. Well, instead, what we can do is issue a command through the cloud to go talk to the machine and then gather up a forensic package for you to do your forensic analysis on. And sometimes that's important, right? Because if you want to be able to understand the threat pretty quickly and keep it from spreading further, you know, these isolation mechanisms and these investigative processes really pay off. Yeah, the question is, can you isolate the machine and then also pull the file back up for analysis? Yes. We keep the kind of the command and control channel up from the cloud to the agent. We block it from talking on the network, except out to the IP addresses for our cloud service so that we can send it commands and get data back. Yeah, good question. Okay. You know, I think one of the last things I'm going to talk about is really integration through the kill chain, right? So I showed you a little bit about this on your left side, which is the Office 365 ATP integration. So being able to see that spear phishing email come in even before it hit their machine and block it at that perspective. But then also do the forensic or the breakdown of the attack and investigation of the attack in Defender ATP. But we're also now working on integration with Advanced Threat Analytics. If you haven't looked at Advanced Threat Analytics, I highly recommend it. When it comes to detecting past the ticket and past the hash from a network perspective, it's very difficult to do, and I think Advanced Threat Analytics is a product that really does a great job with that. And let me show you that real quick. So the way I like to think about it is Defender Advanced Threat Protection kind of looks through the lens of the machine. So I'm kind of seeing what the behaviors are on the machine and things like that. ATA looks through the lens of the computer. So let me go up here back to Liz Bean's machine. And let me go click. So for example, if I click on Liz Bean's machine here, I can see all the places that she logged in both interactively and from a network perspective too, okay? So for example, she's logged into 4 different machines here. So I can see, you know, Bill's machine she logged in, you know, those types of things. So then I might be wondering, okay, well, is Liz Bean's machine, or is her user ID compromised? So what I can do is, looking on her machine, I can go over to her user account and click on it, and it'll think. There we go. Now this is just a mock-up. This is not ready yet. But this is a view into Advanced Threat Analytics. And now what I can do is say, okay, is Liz Bean's identity compromised at some point? And sure enough, I can see that based on her behavior, where she signs in from, what time she signs in from, how she signs in correlation with her coworkers, etc., I can see that Liz Bean's identity is more than likely compromised. So this kind of takes you through the entire kill chain, right? It takes you from the initial infiltration through spear phishing. It also shows you where their command and control is set up. And now this is also showing you their cycling from low privilege to high privilege escalation, which we know happens between about 15 minutes and 24 hours. Yes, sir? How come there's not a red alert on the front screen? Oh, this one here? For Advanced Threat Analytics?
Yeah, how come her account being compromised is not a red alert on the front screen? Why isn't she on the front screen? Her account's been compromised.
Oh, I see. It would be from Advanced Threat Analytics point of view, yes. But we're tracing it more along the lines of where is she logging in and things like that, and then we rely on signal data from ATA. That part is still kind of cooking, so to speak, so I do imagine that we will be able to feed alerts in eventually. Yeah, but that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
So you talked about response. What
Yep.
about law enforcement response? You know that these are known actors, they're known processors, all this sort of thing. And you know what IP addresses they're connecting from. Does Microsoft then go aggregate all that up and go, okay, let's get this guy?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So we have a cybercrimes division, right, that goes out and actually hunts these type of people. And you've probably seen it in the news where we've taken down some various botnets and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are kind of going on around that security graph I talked about. we're doing things like this, feeding that data back to customers, but we're also using that data to stop things like child exploitation and stuff like, the really bad stuff. So this is just one thing that we're doing, but absolutely, we are still committed to disrupting botnets and things of that nature too. Yeah, good question. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Oh, are they usually owned, I guess, or?
Yeah, so when they turn it on, is it typical that they go, oh my God, there's all this stuff we didn't know about? Does it range from, oh yeah, see, we're secure, we don't need this product, go away, or does it? It's like, holy cow, we never knew all of this.
Yeah.
And then typically, what? Don't use an example, but a hypothetical customer, if you want.
Sure. Okay. Hypothetical customer, Jake's DeLorean used parts. Okay. Yeah, because if I don't do a good job here, that's probably what I'm going to be doing. Yeah, so there have been instances, where, we may not have found like oh my gosh, there's a high-profile nation-state threat actor in my environment kind of thing, not me personally, have not worked on, but it certainly does raise the awareness of some of the stuff that's going on, right? I'll give you an example. The popcorn time example that I used previously, essentially, that's what happened. Like, we saw an alert saying, hey, this machine has talked to a Tor node, okay? And if you're not familiar with a Tor node, a Tor network, or the Tor network, is basically a bunch of anonymized nodes all over the internet to where you could proxy through and hide where you're coming from. It's also home for a lot of bad stuff too, and that's generally where a lot of people end up buying things like exploit kits and things like that. Okay, bad stuff. But anyway, the alert came up and it said, this machine is talking out to a Tor node. So they kind of freaked out, right? And they were like, oh my gosh, what's happening? So what we ended up doing was, through the investigation there, we walked back in the timeline and actually showed that what had happened was the user used a third-party browser and they installed a third-party extension to watch those pirated movies called Popcorn Time. So we saw exactly where they installed it. We also found some like keygen stuff. So like, for example, so-and-so, like, a known bad piece of code was running. So AV missed it because it was pretty new. But, characters like Gold, for example, that's one of the threat actors that we follow. They'll actually hide malware inside of keygens. And so this person was cracking Creative Suite for Adobe, I think it was. I guess they didn't want to pay. So they used the keygen on their work machine. And they got it off their own home machine, which that's pretty cool. And the fact that we saw from their house, they were connecting to their file server at home and getting that keygen. Now, some people might be like, oh, that's an invasion of privacy. That's a work machine. I mean, that's a work-owned asset that person loaded a keygen on. That puts the organization at risk. So you don't have to walk over there. I'll repeat his question. Yep. Well, okay, I can just arm you with data. Okay, I can't tell you how to drop the hammer, but yeah. So this thing, you can do searches. So like, I can go here and say user. Hopefully I get it in the right. Yeah, hopefully I get. Yeah. So now I can say, okay, here's Liz Bean. Here's all the machines she's logged into, and specifically with her account, it probably wouldn't show anything, but what I could do is say, okay, yeah, this is her machine. Let's see all the things that her machine's been doing. Yes, bad stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And something that I didn't show is these are all like workable cases, okay? So the question, I didn't repeat that. I said I'd do it, but I didn't. It's the humidity, I'm telling you. Yeah, the question was, can you kind of use this data to arm HR so that they can go and kind of have a discussion with the person, possibly help them spend more time with their family? This So that's going on video too. I'm getting fired. Yes, you can. So what you can do here is I can actually click this checkbox here, and then I can say assign to me, and then put comments in here and things like that. And that's all stuff you can pull down into your SEM and things like that. Yeah. You can pivot in here. You can export it out to CSV if you want to. So lots of different ways that you can do that. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. And then I'll get.
Sorry, it's just probably more response to the thing before. I know we looked at ATA, and I think Microsoft said that they wouldn't come in and install it until we had a first response procedure.
Okay.
To actually execute, because I was in the US at a security thing a couple of weeks ago, and they said they get this every time they install it on someone. There's something, and a lot of companies go, "Oh, we'll come in and just get it installed, and it'll be great," and they go. But unless you've got some kind of response on how to deal with it,
yeah.
Again,
That's
it
a
might
good
be
point. I've heard the stories. I haven't, luckily for myself, I haven't been involved in something like that. But yeah, if you think about it, 200 days is a long time. And there's probably stuff going on your network that you don't quite know about. And it could be as simple as somebody like a pen tester that you have on staff that's just doing their job right. It could be that. Or it could be something really, really bad. But what I will say is that that certainly shouldn't prevent you from standing it up and taking a look, because we have, as part of Microsoft Consulting Services, we have an incident response team. So we have a team that if something like that were to happen, we can actually deploy them on site and get to hunting. There's guys like, they call them the Beard. They have all these key names because obviously if you're owned, we can't be like, hey, Jake's in the house, and they know who Jake is, right? So these guys are really good. They fly all over the world. I'm good friends with one of them. He's a reverse engineer. So we actually put a reverse engineer on premises. So when we deploy a whole team of people, we have threat hunter people, we have infrastructure people, we also have a reverse engineer. So if it's something exotic that we haven't seen before, they'll actually debug it right there and tell you, hey, these are all the memory things that it's doing, et cetera. So they'll like implode it right there. And these are escalation engineers in our queues and stuff. So I guess what I'm saying is we're here to help, in that case. So even if you don't have an incident response plan, which you should, but even if you don't, we can help. So, cool. Yes, sir. Yes, that's a good question. So I know you can export things out to CSV and things like that, but as far as pausing in the cloud, we don't have that today. But that's an excellent suggestion. So the question was, can you put the data involving that person on legal hold? Which is pretty smart. I see where you're going with that, because if there's going to be some kind of litigation where you got to bring up charges of an insider threat, you got to be able to have that data. We're working on some API stuff to where you could suck this data down into your own stuff. So I could see that being it, but some people may want to keep it in the cloud. That's a good suggestion. I'll pass that on. Yeah, but not today, not in the cloud today. Yeah. I'm surprised nobody's asked the golden question, do you have to use Defender AV? I'm surprised nobody's asked. Does anybody want to know that? I can talk about that. Okay. No, you don't. In fact, we designed the system to work in concert with third-party AV, because AV, again, is more of a pre-breach tool, right? We are a post-breach analysis tool. So even if you're using a third-party AV, we will still work as well. Now, bless you. I did show some, that's on the recording, sorry. I did show some things in the response in the videos where, for example, like block and quarantine, as long as you haven't nuked the AV service for Defender, which you should not do. You should not disable the Windows service, and if you want to know why, I'll meet with you in the speaker room, and I'll tell you all the bad stuff that can happen from that. But because there's no reason to. But as long as you haven't nuked the service, we can wake the Defender AV service up and go grab that file and kill the process. Now, to block it across the whole environment, you do have to be using Defender AV. But you can use a third-party AV in conjunction with this. It's just a better together story if you do. No, anybody. We tried to be kind of open as we could, yeah. In fact, the other thing I was going to say is we just lit this code up a couple weeks ago. If you do use Defender AV, we also surface the alerts from Defender AV in this console. So I don't have anything in my example today, but if that person were to get some malware and then like something else came in and it was bad and we didn't catch it, you'd see the AV catching it, and then you'd see the other things as well. So, Okay, I'll shut up and start answering questions again. We have till, how long do we have? We have till 45 after? 45. Okay, cool. I don't know who was next.
What
Okay,
about
down here.
System Center endpoint protection that comes with Config Manager? Does that do?
Yes.
If we pay for that?
Yep, yeah, that'll surface events in here as well. And think of SCEP kind of like Defender AV with management on top of it. But it's the same engine, right? So yeah, it all's all cool in the gang. Yeah. He's going back there with the mic. Yeah, thanks.
Does an administrator or someone with privileges have the ability to remove entries that ATA has detected?
That ATA has it detected, or ATP? ATP. Yeah, so you can dismiss them. You can't nuke them completely, but you can dismiss them, and you can mark them as false negative, false positive. And we take that data back. And by the way, the other thing I didn't mention is this cloud tenant is your tenant. So it's not, it runs on Azure, yes, but it's privatized to you. So we don't have access to your tenant. We don't look at your tenant. We don't do any of those things. It's private to you. Okay, it runs in, yes, it does run in a public cloud, but it is your tenant. So I didn't talk about that, but I should have. Next here, and then we'll go here.
So is this current branch only? And also, it doesn't appear to be in Windows Server. Is that correct?
Yeah, good question. It's in Anniversary 1607 and forward, so not in LTSB. When it comes to server, we just had a blog post about a week ago saying that we will support server. We have not announced what versions yet, and we're open to feedback. But I'll just say we do realize that not everybody's going to get to Windows Server 2016 like tomorrow. We understand that deployment is a little more tough to do. Not that Windows client is not tough, just meaning that usually what we see in the pattern is server deployment tends to lag a little bit. So we will support server in the future. XenApp? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we think it makes sense to run it on server too. Absolutely. Yeah. So even if you're layering XenApp on top or you're doing XenDesktop or something like that, it'll be there in server in the future. Yeah. Can't commit to any timelines, but I can say we were working on it. I'm not sure. Did I miss somebody? Okay.
Was there any information regarding the exploits, whether there's a way of blocking them? So if you had EMET or something else installed, would that block them? Does it show that information if you've been already attacked? And then you can look through and go, well, if we had EMET installed and we had these things set up, we wouldn't have been exploited?
Yeah, good question. So it is in the plans to surface things like credential guard and device guard events up into this. EMET, not today, because EMET, as you probably know, got announced end of life, right? If surfacing EMET type events into this is of interest to you, come see me, please, because I need to get that information.
2 parts, but pretty close. What SKUs does it support in Windows 10? And also, do these have to be domain joined? How do I, if I have machines in a work group, can I add them? How do I point my clients to go to my cloud? How do I configure that?
Very good. Okay, so the SKUs that it's in, and keep me honest, because I missed the 180-day thing. So it's in Enterprise, it's in Pro, it's in IoT Enterprise, and Education. See, I knew I'd miss one. So those are the ones that it's in. What was the second question? Oh, yeah. Come to the session tomorrow. No, I was kidding. No, that was a joke. So there's like 4 different ways that you can deploy, but basically there's a script you can deploy. And yes, it does work with like Azure AD joined, modern managed machines, and even like workgroup machines. It will work in those instances. Essentially what you do is you run a script. It does a certificate type pinning or a certificate secure communication channel establishment between our cloud and the endpoint. And then away it goes. It sends up the data. So there's kind of like a handshake process. And we'll go through that tomorrow in the session tomorrow pretty deeply. I'm just going to I'll flip something real quick. Yeah, while you're teeing up the next person. One thing I want to mention real quick is, before we run out of time, is you can set up for a trial. So that's the link on how to do a trial. Basically, the way it works is you go there, you fill out some company information, so that we can harass you over the phone. No, I was kidding. No, you fill out the information so we know where to send the credentials to and things like that. And then there's a Microsoft case study up here. So Microsoft IT, I talked about over 500,000 endpoints being monitored. In fact, my Azure AD joined machine is being monitored, which is pretty cool. And then there's some TechNet resources too. On the deployment question, shameless plug. If you were here yesterday, you know I'm not above shameless plugs. I did one with PowerShell yesterday, which I thought was pretty cool. If you want to know how to deploy this is probably going to be a boring session because it's pretty easy to deploy it, okay? But we'll go through all the different things on how to deploy it. I just ripped on my own session in the future tense, didn't I? That's not very good for attendance. Yeah. So
Just
anyway.
a quick one. So your end clients have to be Windows 10 to
I'm sorry?
pull up into this?
Yes.
So your end clients have to be Windows 10?
They have to be Anniversary Edition, yes. Yep. Yeah, and a lot of people are like, man, why not backport that to Windows 7? I kind of say, I use an analogy for that one. That's kind of like putting an awesome video camera on the front of your house with no front door. Because it's like you're doing a lot for post-breach, but for pre-breach, not so much. Okay, now Emmet with Windows 7, that's pretty good. But some of the stuff, like I was talking about with the app container font, font containerization and things like that, it's just not in the code. And to try to backport that, we actually backported it to 8, but I don't know if we did the font one. I know we did MemGC, but to try to backport that would be brutal. Yeah. So.
If you have penetration testing runs from a certain IP address, is there a way to mark that as always going to be false positives?
I don't think we have the way to exclude that today. I don't think we have a way to mark that as no big deal. That's a good suggestion, though. Yeah. Any other
Last
questions?
chance. I feel like a hawker.
Yeah, no, man, you like burned 1,000 calories. We call it calories. You guys have a different. Okay. KGs, yeah, I'm bad at math, so I'm like, I don't know what that is. All I know is I need to burn a lot more of them. Okay, so I'm supposed to show, continue your Ignite learning path. There's some links there. I'm pretty sure you saw that in everyone. I hear you can win a pilot pass for a drone, to fly a drone, which I think is pretty cool. Personally, I would try to crash it, but you didn't hear that from me. Hey, and thank you. So I'm going to go hang out in the speaker lounge. So if you have any questions or you want to make fun of me, any of that stuff, it's all fair game. I'm going to go in the speaker lounge. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you.